It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Irwin, hello.
Were you planning the greeting?
No, I'm spontaneous that way.
Okay, just
Yeah,
checking.
I know, but I do think about it right when we're about to start. What am I going to do today?
And I look forward to hearing what you're going to do. It's, in its own way, it's become a sort of like an element of our Hamptons podcast.
Yeah.
What is Esperanza? How is Esperanza going to greet Irwin? I love it. It's
Even I surprise myself later when I hear it.
exactly.
What did I do?
It's Esperanza sort of gets the short end of the stick at the opening because she knows I'm going to just open with her name, but I'm here tingling with anticipation.
Well, we're always hopeful. That's
exactly. And you rarely disappoint.
And
Esperanza, you rarely disappoint. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. But so
where are we going today?
We've talked a lot about these neighborhoods, sort of more, how do I describe this? Not specific enough. Neighborhoods that are part of associations. Now, obviously, we've touched on the Georgia Association many a time on Our Hamptons, but being a Springs guy, like I am, Esperanza, we're going to go to Barnes Landing.
Excellent.
And we owe a big thank you. We're getting a lot of this information from the Barnes Landing Association. Let's just give a little geographical perspective. It's Springs East Side. We'll call it that. That's how it's known. It's, I guess we could call it the northeastern side of Springs, really bordering Amagansett, bordering the Bell Estate, which was the subject of a prior Our Hamptons, as you know.
So northeastern, not southeastern. Why am I? Really I'm kind of trying to get situated. Okay.
They touch northeastern, if it's, we could call the intersection of Old Stone Highway and Barnes Hole Road. A couple of the other streets of Barnes Landing runs off of Old Stone as well, Winding Way, a few of the others. And it's sort of, if you headed north on Old Stone, you'd get to Louse Point.
Right.
You're going south.
Beautiful spot. Yeah.
Beautiful spot. And if you're heading south on Old Stone, you're getting into Amagansett North.
Right.
The Bell Estate.
Right.
Which again was a subject of a prior Our Hampton. So thank you to the Barnes Landing Association for their excellent website and a great history by Bill Good Jr., who wrote this for the website, along with Francine Whitney. We're getting a lot of information, from this website from both of those people. And Bill's a great guy, member of the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society.
Of course he is.
Because everything is connected on Our Hamptons.
This is a small town after all.
It is a small town.
And that's why we do love it.
And that is why we do love it. But Barnes Landing historically, and we touched on this, Esperanza, now that I think of it, when we spoke about Springs and the Barnes General Store with Clarence Barnes, how all of this just has to be connected. Known historically as Barnes Hole, as Bill Good writes here, the border of Springs and Amagansett. Interesting. Barnes Landing is actually, I think, they have Amagansett phone numbers, Amagansett fire protection. But
is it? It's a 267. Yeah,
it's a 267, but they go to Springs School. So, so that's...
It's crazy how those school districts are sometimes different from...
Exactly. And
geography, actually, yeah.
Now, according to Bill, the Barnes name possibly came from an Isaac Barnes, who was born in East Hampton in 1677 and was, according to Bill, one of the four founders of Amagansett. They settled around 1700, and Isaac lived and died in Amagansett at 1769, lived to 92 years old.
That's incredible, by the way. I mean, that is a testament to the pure, healthy life that people lived out here, I guess, on fish.
I mean, yeah, I mean, because obviously the life expectancy in 1769 was nowhere near 92
No,
years.
you were a senior citizen by age 45. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. Yeah.
for sure, and Bill writes here, how brickmaking at that point was a very early
Oh
local
yeah, because he
industry.
was a brickmaker. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, of course, there was, we're just going to go over this before we get into the real heart of the matter, just a little bit of, what the old history was. Seaweed was another resource harvested from the shoreline, eelgrass, fishing, obviously. There was a little fleet of commercial boats at Louse Point, very nearby Barnes Landing, that Bill brings out.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
mean, I love the seaweed idea. I think that I'm wondering whether that came from, what was learned from the indigenous population, indigenous people that really shared their knowledge of this area and how things could be used. And that seaweed and the eelgrass was something I'm sure
yeah,
the Montaukett and Shinnecock used, along with the menhaden, which is something that
of
was
course.
very much fished along here, I'm sure. But I love the fact that that's what you find in some of these old homes is the seaweed used as insulation.
Exactly.
It's
Right.
incredible,
Right.
right?
Sometimes you had seaweed, or a lot of times old newspapers you'll
Or
find,
corn cobs, like
right.
the old
They
corn. Yeah,
literally threw everything in there.
yeah.
But, so according to Bill, bringing it a little bit, not really, this is, it still isn't present day. The earliest home in Barnes Landing, according to him, that still exists is a house at 96 Barnes Hole Road. And it's known as, another name that we know out here, the Hezekiah Edwards house, uh, reportedly from the 1800s. And there's also a house. Now, this, we should issue a disclaimer. Bill wrote this a few years back. This is not necessarily immediate, because with everything that's going on out here in terms of building and knockdowns and everything, we're going to hope
Oh,
that this
please
house,
don't tell me this other house may have been
I'm
demolished.
we hope not, and I don't know. I can't really answer it, but Bill brings out in his dialogue here, the fork in the road where Barnes Hole meets Old Stone. There's a 1.5 story. I'm crossing my fingers that it's still there. I think it is, but it was from 1835, known as the Washington Bennett House.
Right,
Bennett,
another name. Yeah.
another name out here. So let's I'll have to take a
Yeah,
ride. I'll have to take a ride over there to confirm or deny whether that
you
place is still there.
Mr. Good writes that it has been altered over the years, whereas the Edwards house actually is pretty much intact, I think, so much so that it's one of 13 special historic landmarks that the town designated as historic, having historic status in 2013. I don't know if
Okay,
you
no,
knew that,
that
but
is
that is one of those. Does have landmark status,
that
which
is
thankfully for that.
that is a priceless little gem,
It's a
as
bit of
far as
an odd status because it means that probably that property is fairly large or large enough to accommodate another larger house. So what it is, that designation allows the owner, to build another house so that the historic house remains intact.
got it. Got
Yeah.
it.
And
Wow.
I mean, it should, if it's from the early 1800s. I saw a picture. It's such a picture perfect little house.
Esperanza Leon may be conducting seminars on subject matter like this in the near future. We'll publicize that as it gets closer. But no, that was a really great piece of info.
I
I
just
mean,
love old houses.
me too, me too. And I mean, and some of these, I mean, I know of a house. It's probably that house. I mean, uh, there's a house on Barnes Hall Road. I mean, New York Times had a story on it. I should have really gotten the number. I'm going to guess it might be 96, but it's really if you're traveling towards the bay on Barnes Hall Road, it's on the right or southern side of the street. It's really a beautiful property. We should also mention, before we get into it a little bit more, this community is a waterfront community,
Mhm.
Gardeners Bayfront. The beach is not private. It's a town beach. Anyone can
Right.
park there. Unlike some of
Well,
the other
anyone
associations,
with a town permit,
with a
I
town
presume,
permit
right?
can park
Yeah.
there, right? It's not completely. Lionhead Beach and Clearwater Beach, for example, have private beaches only for their resident. Georgia
Mm.
Association as well. But this one is a town beach, but really beautiful spot. When you go down Barnes Hill Road, and road just ends at the water. It is
Right.
really, really pretty. And, some of the streets that run north-south, Water's Edge, which is a waterfront street, has pathways going down also. Really, it's a sweet little neighborhood. But according to Bill, some of these earlier summer homes were built, in Barnes Landing. There was something called the Ross Family Compound, built in 1910, the third in 1920, built by two Methodist ministers out here, Howard and Charles Ross.
They were
Um,
brothers.
they
Yeah.
were brothers. They were brothers. Not, today not visible from a public road, but by private drives from Shorewood and from Shore Ridge and from Barnes Hall Road. And of course, there's St. Peter's on Old Stone Highway
Right.
near Chapel Lane. Currently, bit of controversy about a cell phone tower, but that's not where we want to go here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such a pretty little chapel. I know that like it's originally constructed 1881, but there's that whole discussion as to how how much integrity it has, especially the bell tower and the bell, which is an old Civil War bell, I think,
Right.
dates to the Civil War. Who knows? But anyway, it is a delightful little spot that was originally actually non-denominational. It was
Ah,
taken, it was affiliated with St. Luke's beginning in the early
right.
1900s, right? So my sister got married there, in fact.
At St. Luke's or at St.
at
Peter's?
at St. Peter's,
Oh,
because
no
she used to
kidding.
live right up the road on Old Stone. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
it is that. Wow, that must have been a
near
sweet place.
Barnes Hole. Yeah.
Sure. That must have been a sweet place for a wedding. That's
Oh, it was
very
so cute.
picturesque. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, here's where we're getting into the meat and potatoes. When this place really started getting,
Developed.
there's Esperanza Leon using profanities again on our Hamptons
Well,
podcast.
development doesn't always have to
That's true.
mean be a bad
Exactly.
word.
Thank you for reprimanding me, because that's not fair, and I don't want our builders, developers who listen to our Hamptons yelling at me. I'm a very sensitive guy, but um, we go back to
Progress is progress. We can't.
yes.
And in the words of wisdom from Paul Goldberger, this is not a museum. And look at that. We're going to be talking about a development that now we consider to be something special, right? As
Completely,
history.
totally true. And I mean, so we should talk about William Bates Codling. Born Connecticut guy, actually, in Wilton, Connecticut, born in 1855, but moved to Long Island. And by the early 1900s, he moved, I think, to Northport, Long Island, Western
Yeah.
Suffolk County. By the early 1900s, Codling became one of the largest landowners, not only in Suffolk County, in the town of East Hampton, but in Suffolk County.
I guess it helped that he was an attorney, like a real estate lawyer.
That was his dream. I mean, he moved from Connecticut to pursue that dream. I mean,
Yeah.
of getting involved in real estate and whatnot. Now he died in 1924 being struck by a car. So let me see. In my math, that would make him, he was 40, it would make him 69 years old when he died.
In Huntington.
In Huntington, Long
Yeah.
Island. And he
in
had,
1924.
right.
That used to happen a lot back then, by the way. Isn't that insane?
Well, people getting hit by, I guess,
yeah,
just
that's
lack of
that's what
traffic
happened
signal.
to yeah, I mean, I just think, yeah, people not knowing how to, there were no rules probably, or not how we have them today. And that happened to like, I'm thinking immediately of the architect Gaudi in Barcelona. He got killed by, I think, a bus or something, a trolley or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's I never really thought of that, but I mean, I'm going to take your word for it. I mean, it sounds logical, because it probably, I mean, I can't imagine there were stop signs and traffic lights and
they moved faster.
Yeah, and they move faster. So yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably,
yeah, poor man.
Yeah. So he obviously, his wife survived him, along with two children, William and Helen. And
this is where the story gets good.
This is where the story gets sort of interesting, because again, and we talk about this is another one of these recurring our Hampton themes. You got to remember now, in the 1920s, 30s, what have you, women in the workplace market, what have you, not as common as today. We'll call it that. I mean, it wasn't, but apparently Helen,
The daughter.
the daughter, became the powerhouse behind developing Barnes Landing, not the son or
Hmm.
the wife for that matter, but
Hmm.
Helen Codling Halstead, and that's Halsted. I know
Hmm.
there's Halstead with an A, but she eventually developed Barnes Landing. Now, this is, a lot later, obviously. This is 28 years after the death of
Yeah,
her
beginning
father.
in the early 50s, right.
Right.
So
And
that land was owned by the family, and then
that,
she began to develop it.
that is correct. And remember, Codling was an enormous land. And
Right.
we're gonna go somewhere with that very soon. There's going to be a connection, and that's a there's going to be a connection in the town of Southampton very shortly in this
Uh-huh.
episode. Wow, good teaser, right?
You
Yeah.
have me in
Yeah,
suspense.
exactly.
Pins and needles.
Pins and needles. So, sort of similar when I'm waiting for Esperanza's greeting at the opening of the show. But so Helen apparently eventually developed Barnes Landing, according to Bill, from 1952 to the 1960s. And I like this line: just prior to the advent of town zoning. Um,
I always forget that I have to look up when zoning code was implemented. I thought it was in in like the late 50s, but I guess it's in the early
and
60s.
it
Yeah.
might have been somewhere in that neighborhood. And if you've ever seen the emblem of Barnes Landing, you see this when you go to the little house right at the beach.
Hmm.
It's and I like this. This was in honor of her father. I think this is really cool part of the story. Um, it's a horse and buggy because that was the mode of transportation that the father used to acquire and to ultimately view his properties. Sort of a, talk about non-poetic justice, for lack of a better term. The
Well,
guy went on a
the
horse and buggy.
irony,
Yeah, the
yeah,
irony. That's the word I was looking
that's what
for.
I was thinking. We're going to bring it up, like
Yeah.
the irony of this, that he got run over by an automobile, and
Well,
then she honors him with, yeah, with the horse and buggy emblem, which is how his mode of transportation was the horse and buggy. Yeah.
exactly. And you see it in that little building. In that building, I don't. Have you ever been to this little Barnes Landing house, Esperanza?
I
It's on
I
the
think I
corner.
have. Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
like a little. It is a tiny one-room building. I mean, I've been there a number of times. And it's right at the corner of Barnes Hall Road, which, it's right up. You could see the water from the building. I mean, it's right at the edge, and Water's Edge Road. That was the real estate office where she was selling the lots in 1952, and it was ultimately it's been deeded to the Barnes Landing Association, and there was 400 feet of beach there. They have a
So is
parking
it
lot.
not a public, but an association space that they use for meetings
Well,
and things
that's what
like
they do
that?
with
And
it now. Yes,
yeah,
that's what
birthday
it's.
parties.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have like a periodic meetings. There. I mean, this episode is going to air afterwards, but I'm actually speaking to them in July at one of their annual meetings, putting on my East Hampton Trails Preservation Society hat. Although somehow,
Your
I,
presidential
yeah,
hat.
yeah, exactly. Although somehow I have a feeling that this podcast is going to come into play too. But that's I don't have as many hats as Esperanza Leon, but I have a few.
You
Uh,
too, you too.
I have a few. So um, and today, just to give you an idea of where we are today, and we're going to wrap around this, there's approximately, and again, this is going back a couple of years, it may be plus minus, but approximately there's 250 property owners on 220 acres of the barn in Barnes Landing. The association itself, according to Bill, formed in 1958, really, like any association, is to protect the property owners' interests and enhance the community. And I will tell you, like, I live in a section of Springs that's not doesn't have an association,
Mhm.
unlike the three that are. And there is something nice about an association that I like in terms of a
Yeah,
sense of
I mean,
community.
I'm always curious to know what like what their bylaws are and what their covenants and restrictions are, because that sometimes, if they really had a vision to maintain a certain character for that place, and like, where they would say you can't, basically, like, you can't build a house like,
Right.
too big or this or that, or I'm always curious about that. I'd be curious to know what this
Yeah.
is.
exactly. And
I
I think
wanted to ask you though, I see that they were deeded 400 feet of beach. Now you said that that was still public beach, but they're deeded that, or how does that work?
yeah, well, if you go to the end of Barnes Hole Road, again, unlike Clearwater Beach, which is gated at the northern end of Springs, I mean, you can't even drive in there. I mean, there's a gate. And Lionhead Beach, which is just adjacent, on the eastern side of Hog Creek, east western side of Hog Creek, excuse me, from Clearwater. Those are private beaches,
I thought all the beaches in East Hampton were public because they're owned by the
I
trustee.
mean, well, let's put it like this. They I think
It's a question. I don't know.
well, no. I mean, it's
I
a
don't know
great
the
question
answer.
because I think ultimately these beaches tend to become about the parking more than anything. A lot of
Oh,
times.
100. Yes, of course. That
I
is
mean,
the issue. Yeah.
if I park at Main Beach, um, in term to your point, I think I could go walk my beach chair and sit in front of anyone's house. I don't think they have the right to, uh,
Exactly.
so I think if I walked along Gardiner's Bay and ultimately ended up at Clearwater Beach, even though that's a private beach where I can't drive my car into park, I mean, I don't think they could throw me out. I mean,
Right.
I
Like
don't
even
think.
you mentioned the Georgia Association. It's
Right.
not like I can't go and sit next to the lifeguard chair there
Of
and
course you can.
I,
Yeah. Right.
nobody's going to say you have to get off this beach.
Correct. Except you can't park your car
I
by the
can't
beach.
go into the association and
Correct.
park by the pavilion.
Correct. So
That's
these are sort of like all, for lack of a better term, we'll call them gray areas. I mean, in
yeah.
terms of this, but the difference is, Barnes Landing is you. I can go there. You can go there and just drive right to that
Yeah.
parking
I've been,
facility and
yeah,
and
been
park
down.
there,
Yeah.
which is not the same case, for example, as at Clearwater Beach.
Right. Right.
Um, but anyway, moving on with this story. And this is part of it about Francine. Whitney brings into play here. And again, this is so reminiscent of an episode we did about the vision of these people, like to
Mm-hmm.
create things reminiscent of Mid Hamptons when we discussed something similar.
Yeah.
Uh,
Communities, creating like a community
right,
or
right.
sans, like the sans area.
Exactly. So the town of East Hampton, they already approved these small building lots uh, from Helen Halstead. And listen to this, Esperanza. Her vision included a Marina Beach restaurant with a dance floor, lounge rooms, and a bathhouse at Accabonac Harbor, a boardwalk along Barnes Landing Beach, a row of shops along the unpaved path that she christened Quality Row, which is a street in Barnes Landing, exists to this day, Quality Row. I was always curious about that name. Maybe that's where it's now I'm getting the answer. Proposed shops included an ice cream parlor, a liquor store, a beauty parlor. I mean, this is the
And
1950s.
a
Can you
nursery
believe this?
school, daycare center. I mean, honestly, it's fortunately her vision did not come to pass,
Right.
but maybe, there's nothing out there. Like there's no shopping, like a little grocery store, except if you go to the
Marty's Deli. Right.
Marty's,
Right. Right. Yes.
it's it's pretty secluded. And wouldn't
Yeah.
it have been nice to at least have some little shops there? Like not, like Rodeo Drive,
No,
but
of course. Yeah. But again, it goes back when we talk about sense of place on our Hamptons, how the, and again, if we go back to Beach Hampton, where they also had this
yeah, yeah.
waterfront restaurant. If we go back more so to Mid Hamptons, where
Those were the amenities.
those were the
I had to bring
I
it in,
I
Lerwin.
I,
You know
I
it.
just threw my pen down on my little notebook here because I knew I've been waiting for it for about 25 minutes now.
Mic
And
drop.
but thank you, Esperanza, because I really it's not an episode if we don't talk about it. But if you remember Mid Hamptons, I mean, they were literally wanted to create a Coney Island
Oh yeah.
on Georgia
Casino, polo
Pond.
grounds, the whole,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, so now, and this, interestingly enough, is a little later. This we're talking 1950s
Right,
was when she was
right.
talking about this, but ultimately, it didn't come to happen. which I guess, fortunately, unfortunately, whatever, but it didn't
But I do,
happen.
oh, okay, I'm still stuck on the nursery school daycare center where, quote, parents can have their small children taught during the day and be kept overnight so that they can take off for New York or go on a fishing trip.
Kept overnight. I mean, what is this, Club Med over here? I mean,
Yes, that is exactly, that was, it apparently was Mrs. Halstead's vision. Yeah,
that is
incredible.
that really, I mean, and what a vision it was. It was you know, just crazy stuff. And Bill Good adds, obviously these things didn't come to play.
No, I mean, I think even then there was a concern, it seems, over the over exploitation of the land and the water. And I mean, look at what, yeah, this history repeats itself over and over and over
Completely true,
again.
completely true. And we're going to bring in something else, but I just want to touch on a couple of things. Bill Good. This was actually not on. This was like a conversation I had with Bill. We were researching this episode. Uh, Bill lived it. He's one of those stories. His parents bought a house. Back in the day. The whole story. So he's been there since was aware of this area as probably a young man anyway. But he gave me a few of these anecdotes how um, town beach parking stickers to deal with the increasing population, of which beach communities with their large developments were a contributing factor. Didn't come into being until the mid to late 1960s. Now, Bill
Hmm.
was living here at the time. Before then, anyone could park anywhere.
At any town beach.
At,
Yeah,
at,
and I like the same with the village. I didn't know that Mrs. Babcock, who was my elementary school crossing guard, by
oh
the
my
way,
goodness. Okay.
was the one that instituted village parking permits, beach parking permits.
Ah,
Yeah,
well,
because she died recently. And then I was reading about it. I was like, no way. She was Katie Babcock. You go.
but yeah, and Bill, and Bill relates these other things. How the only beach he recalls now, he's talking about in the mid 1960s. So we're going
Hmm.
back, 50 years, I guess,
Hmm.
60 years, even 50 to 60. The only beach with lifeguards was Main Beach,
Yeah.
and even then, you didn't need beach parking stickers
No,
in the
this
mid
came later.
60s.
This was like I'm saying, Mrs. Babcock. I think it was may have been early 70s.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I would assume because through the 60s. Um, yeah, but really just fascinating stuff. And Bill laments how part of the problem was Helen Halstead in Barnes Landing allowed some of the waterfront houses along Water's Edge Road to be too close to the bluff of the dunes. Again, remember, this was pre-zoning. Probably
Hmm.
things wouldn't be happening there the way they did now. And waterfront property owners, to your point of before Esperanza, how the more things change, some of them saw pieces of the edge of their land breaking off and sliding down. But, it's old story. But we have to tie in Bay Point in South. And
So we're traveling west,
we're traveling west
way
because in
west.
this way west, actually,
Yeah.
Bay Point's another one of these sweet little neighborhoods. It's outside, it's outside of Sag Harbor, not part of the village, but town of Southampton. And this is Francine Whitney's research um, about Bay Point. I guess we should give a little bit of geographic perspective, Esperanza. Bay Point is sort of opposite Long Beach in Sag Harbor.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
when you go
Just
out of this
across the
community,
street. That's so pretty in there. Yeah.
it really is. It really is pretty. And we're not going to, this is a Barnes Landing episode, but just to tie in, and as we start to wrap up this, she, um, how can I describe this? As Francine Whitney described it, to get a sense of what the original plan for Barnes Landing was, you just had to drive through the Bay Point Association in Sag Harbor. Because again, it was small lots with once small homes, like every neighborhood out here.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
lot going on there, knockdowns, huge properties being built. It's a beautiful community in here, waterfront.
Oh
But
yeah,
this was also
surrounded by water, really,
surrounded.
right?
It's almost like a
It's
little. It's not an island, but appears to be an island, like in and of
yeah, it
itself, because
does.
it's
Yeah.
surrounded on multiple sides. And again, this was Helen Halstead's vision, a penchant for creating, to use Fred C. and Whitney's words, a penchant for creating planned seaside communities. So in the early 1950s, so this was simultaneously, Esperanza, to Barnes Landing, I guess. This is more land she inherited from her father.
Right, right. So he had owned it by 1928. Yeah.
You know, it's
100
funny.
acres.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Wow.
funny. What, like, this is not a household name, this Codling family,
At all. Right. I mean, I didn't know all this history for sure. And I was familiar with that little emblem of the Barnes Landing
right, right. I
community.
mean, but like, it's amazing when you think about it. This guy was sort of off radar, but
Yeah.
I was an enormous landowner.
A tycoon. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, in the day, I mean, my gosh. So Helen Halstead owned a number of these parcels, and she christened this area Bay Point. Again, Francine Whitney brings out something we brought out earlier. Lot size zoning did not exist then.
Mm.
And she created as many lots as she could in order to maximize development. There was a boat ramp, community stairs, and Bay Point's success was what really led her. So in a sense, Bay Point was simultaneously, if not a little bit earlier,
Mm.
you know, than Barnes Landing. And to wrap this up, you know, since sometimes you have to go back in the day to go bring it back to the present, I went to the Bay Point website, you know, and it was originally known as Haganak
Uh-huh.
to Native Americans and early Southampton settlers. Here's a very cool part of the story. I like this a lot. In 1872, a Jeremiah Eldridge. Now, that's not a name that's that familiar to me out here, Esperanza. Is it to you?
Eldridge.
Eldridge?
Eldridge. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
okay.
There are
Okay.
Eldridges. Yeah.
But how about he sold part of the area in Bay Point? This is historic going back um, to Abram Hewitt, who later became New York City's mayor.
Huh.
Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. And again, like to tie all of this in, by 1928, right before he died, you know, all 100 acres of Bay Point was owned by William Codling. And again, his daughter Helen inherited the property in the late 1940s. This is right off of the Bay Point website. So I'm going with this is totally accurate.
Irwin, I'm just picturing Mr. Codling driving around in his horse and buggy to all these places. I mean, just think about, like, put yourself in that situation.
I mean, did he go from horse and buggy from Bay Point to Barnes Landing?
That's what I'm trying to picture.
Right. Now, right. I mean, he died actually in 24. So this is it was, yeah. Okay. So the timeline is somewhere in that,
somewhere,
it's somewhere in that neighborhood. So it might be a little early, but irregardless.
Was this the son maybe that owned it? I don't know.
Definitely not, because the son is, I don't know. The son just seems to, I don't know if he was not interested in this kind of business venture, or I don't know what the storyline with the son is, but apparently it was Helen who was the go-getter.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the Bay Point website gives her an A in the name, while everything else, all my other research indicated it.
Oh, with a Halstead.
With a Halstead without it, including the obituary I believe I saw in the East Hampton Star. But anyway, to wrap this up, Home Guardian started formal development with an initial purchase of 40 acres. This is late 1940s.
And Home Guardian being the company that was owned by Helen Halstead?
Apparently, yes. Okay. Started the formal development, split into 501 lots.
So 40 acres split into 501 lots, parcels. Right. Oh my God.
Yeah, wow. Exactly.
You do the math.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't. $275 to $675 each, with a subsequent 40 acres later purchased and developed. And again, they have an association currently 228 single family homes, mostly built on half-acre lots. So again, similar in size and scope. You could see the parallels, really, Esperanza,
Sure.
to Barnes Landing. The whole, walking distance. Although this, I think, has a boat launch, which I don't think the others do. But very similar walking distance to a beach. Although this one, to go to Long Beach, you have to cross that very busy road.
Right, right. I'm
Um,
just thinking about the fact that there was never this intention of developing these into larger lots. It was like maximizing, I guess, the profit in a way, but also I'm thinking how it was really maybe done for the quote unquote common man, like not, these weren't estates,
no,
in other words.
no, definitely not. And to that point, very possible. I mean, remember, this is, I'm so glad you brought that up, Esperanza, because that's another recurring theme on our Hamptons podcast, how so many of these properties were marketed as Beach Hampton comes to mind immediately. Not to mention Leisure-Rama, that's a whole other conversation. But it was really marketed to middle
Middle
class,
class, yeah.
working,
That
people who
quickly
worked for a living.
disappearing middle class.
The disappearing, this was, this is not an economics podcast, but there was far less income inequality in this time and era. Middle class, regular working people, whatever, police, teachers, whatever, they could afford these things.
Yeah, by post-war. I mean, this was post-war
Correct.
USA. Yeah.
So, I mean, and again, it was on the cusp of getting into the whole Leisure-Rama thing, how, it was the era of possibilities,
Exactly.
just before that, how, but again, it was post-war, suburbs were expanding and, hey, vacation houses, beach houses, it's amazing how that theme does recur, isn't it?
Yeah. And I guess my point is not everyone needed an estate.
Or all those amenities.
Or all those amenities. The amenities were all around.
Where amenities were all around. Both of these, Barnes Landing, Bay Point.
Just rich in natural beauty and things to do, go fishing, boating, swimming.
I mean,
no
Bay
end.
Bay Point, was surrounded on is surrounded on almost every side by water.
Yeah.
Every house in that little community can walk to a waterfront or go across the street to a beach. Barnes Landing is also same thing. There was egress to Gardiner's Bay from all of those streets. So,
but now you need a pool.
Now you need a pool. I mean, and that was they all both. You're right. You're right. Not not to mention wine cellars and outdoor kitchens. But again, it's just boy, this theme does repeat on our Hamptons. But
it's really incredible. It is. Yeah. It's so interesting.
It's so interesting how so many changes again. Another our Hamptons term, not ancient history. I mean, 50s, 60s, just how life was looked upon differently. But as far as I think that's as good a place as any to end. Great similarities, parallels between Barnes Landing and Bay Point, both very, really sweet communities.
Yeah. I love the parallel also to the sisters, the Terry sisters for sons, and, women doing this kind of work of planning and developing a community. And I think, just picturing Mrs. Halstead going around in her Jeep with no top, and she was wearing a top. The Jeep was not. I just think that's a parallel also that I want to point out. Yeah.
Such a great point. That's Maud Terry, Amaza Lee Meredith at Sands, and Helen Halstead at Barnes Landing and Bay Point. I mean, again, late 40s, early 50s, women wasn't common. I mean, doing all of this. And honestly, how can we not say they left their mark?
Yeah.
Esperanza, as always, thanks for taking this journey with me. And a pleasure.
Yes, a pleasure as always. Thanks, Irwin.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.